She's just a cleaner. Who invited her? My cousin Ryan said, loud enough for the whole table to hear. My aunt leaned over and whispered, she's not even family. I stood there, holding a plate I hadn't even filled yet. No one said anything in my defense. Then, from across the room, a voice called out, Specialist Reyes, the general said. Everyone turned. He stood tall, looked directly at me, and saluted. She saved my unit in a war zone. My aunt went pale. Ryan couldn't look up. My name is Elena Reyes. I'm 29 years old, and I work as a cleaner on a military base in Virginia. Every night, I sweep hallways, mop break rooms, and take out the trash from offices where people never even notice I exist. I wear a plain uniform, keep my head down, and do my job with care. No one really asks who I am. Most just assume they know. The job doesn't bother me. It's honest work, and I'm good at it. But what does bother me is how people treat me. Because of it. Like I don't matter. Like I never could. Even people in my own family look at me like I'm some kind of embarrassment. It wasn't always like that. Before this job, before the uniform and the cleaning cart, I served in the army. I was deployed overseas as a medic. Most of my family doesn't know that. They never asked. They just saw me come home, quiet and different, and assumed I had failed at something. When I left the service after being injured, I didn't talk much about what happened. I didn't need to. I was proud of what I'd done, but I didn't need anyone to clap for me. My mom, Rosa, always told me, some of the strongest people in the world are the quiet ones. The ones who don't need to prove it. She passed away 2 years ago. Since then, I felt more alone in the world than I ever thought possible. She was the only one who saw me, really saw me, without needing an explanation. A few weeks ago, I got an invitation to a memorial brunch for my grandfather. He was a World War II veteran, and the event was being hosted by my Aunt Meredith at a private military banquet hall. She said it was a family event to honor those who served. At first, I thought about not going. I could already picture how it would feel, people dressed up, talking about careers, bragging about their kids, asking me where I was working now and then pretending not to judge. I didn't want to sit through that. But I also knew my grandfather would have wanted me there. He used to call me his little soldier, even after I came home and never put on the uniform again. So I decided to go. I didn't have anything fancy to wear. I came straight from my shift, still in my base-issued uniform. I wiped off the dust as best I could, combed my hair, and walked into the room like I belonged, but the moment I stepped in, I knew I was being judged. The looks, the fake smiles, the forced hellos, it was all there. No one asked me how I was doing. No one offered me a seat. I stood near the back wall, watching my family gather around long tables filled with food and champagne, talking and laughing like I didn't exist, and that's when I heard it, she's just a cleaner. Who invited her? I turned and saw Ryan, my cousin, smirking as he leaned into a group of our relatives. He didn't even lower his voice. Aunt Meredith was right beside him. She didn't correct him. She just whispered, she's not even family. That one cut deeper than I expected. They had no idea who I was. No idea what I had done. They didn't know because they never cared enough to ask, but someone else in that room did, and in a few minutes, he was going to show them exactly why I was there. I stood there for a moment, not sure what to do. Part of me wanted to turn around and leave. I hadn't even poured myself a drink yet. I hadn't said hello to anyone, or signed the guest book they'd set up with my grandfather's photo framed in silver. But in that moment, it didn't feel like a memorial. It felt like a performance. And I wasn't part of the show. My cousin Ryan kept laughing with the people at his table, leaning in like he was telling some private joke. I saw my Aunt Meredith glance at me once, then immediately turn back to the woman next to her and start whispering. I could only imagine what she was saying. I didn't need to hear it. I'd heard enough over the years to fill in the blanks. Things like, she dropped out, she never became anything, she's just a cleaner now. That word, just, always, followed me around like a shadow. The room was full of family I hadn't seen in years. Distant uncles, second cousins, in-laws. Most of them remembered me as a teenager, quiet and serious, always helping my mom in the kitchen during holidays. Or sneaking books out of the living room while the adults argued about politics. I had been invisible then too. Only now, I came back with a uniform and a mop bucket, and somehow I was still the one people whispered about like I didn't belong. A few people gave me quick nods or soft, polite smiles, but no one invited me to sit. One cousin's wife even moved her purse off the chair next to her when I stepped too close, like I might take something. I looked around and realized there wasn't a single spot open. Every table was full of chatter, wine glasses clinking, phones flashing photos of fake smiles. And there I was, standing alone, holding nothing but my own weight. I finally walked to the refreshment table in the back and poured myself a glass of water. I tried to stay calm. I reminded myself I didn't come for them. I came for my grandfather. I came to pay respect. But the voices around me kept pressing in. She works on base. But she's not military, someone said. I heard she was discharged. Another voice added, probably dishonorable. Someone else muttered, and that stung the most. They had no idea what happened. None of them had visited me in the hospital. When I came home with a shrapnel injury, no one called when I couldn't sleep for weeks. They didn't care about the hours I'd spent patching up soldiers under fire, or the day I lost my best friend because we couldn't get a medevac in time. They didn't know any of it. And they didn't want to. The thing is, I could have told them. I could have stood up right there and shouted what I did, what I gave, and what I lived through. But that's never been my way. I don't shout. I don't argue. I don't defend myself to people who never cared to ask the truth in the first place. Still, I could feel the tension tightening in my chest. I wasn't angry, I was tired. Tired of always having to act like the small one so they could feel big. Tired of letting people look through me like I was made of glass. But as much as I wanted to disappear, something in me shifted. I wasn't going to run this time. Not today. Not in this room. I stepped away from the wall and walked toward the hallway just past the restrooms, near the staff exit. I didn't plan to leave. I just needed a second alone to breathe. That's when I remembered my phone was in my back pocket. I pulled it out and tapped on the contact I'd saved over a year ago and never once used. Hey, I said when someone answered. Could you do me a favor? Let the general know that Alina Reyes is here. The voice on the other end paused. Give me 2 minutes. I hung up and stood there for a moment, letting the noise of the room fall away behind me. I had no idea what would happen next. I hadn't called to stir up drama. I hadn't called for attention. I just couldn't let myself be erased again. Not after everything. When I walked back into the banquet room, nothing had changed. Ryan was still bragging about his promotion. My aunt was still talking about how expensive the caterer was. Everyone still looked the other way when I passed, but they wouldn't be looking away for long, because someone in that building still remembered who I was, someone who saw me in the middle of the worst day of his life and didn't forget what I did, and he was on his way. I stood quietly near the back of the banquet room, not drawing attention to myself. No one noticed I had stepped away or made a call. They were too caught up in their own conversations, in their own assumptions. I watched them from a distance, sipping my water, still dressed in my plain uniform. In their minds, I was just one of the staff. A cleaner who somehow made it into a private family event. A mistake no one wanted to correct out loud, but I didn't feel like a mistake. Not anymore. The moment I made that call, something shifted inside me. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, steady, like a small fire finally catching after struggling in the wind. I had spent so many years trying to stay invisible. But deep down, I didn't want to disappear. I just didn't want to be judged by people who only cared about titles and appearances. I didn't want to explain my value to those who were never really listening. But now, standing in that room, something inside me finally said, enough. A minute passed. Then two. I glanced toward the entrance, wondering if he would actually show up. Part of me thought maybe I was wrong to call. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I should have just kept quiet and gotten through the event like I always did, silently. But then, the doors opened, not dramatically. Not with trumpets or footsteps that stopped the room. Just a simple, calm entrance. And yet, it shifted everything. General Beckett walked in wearing a pressed dark blue uniform, medals across his chest, posture strong as ever. He looked exactly like I remembered, sharp eyes, calm expression, the kind of presence that made people straighten up even if they didn't know why. Conversations started to slow. Chairs creaked. A few people stood out of respect as they realized who had walked in. A 4-star general entering a small family memorial? That wasn't something anyone expected. Especially not here. I stood still. He hadn't seen me yet. He scanned the room briefly, then locked eyes with me across the crowd. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I just met his gaze. He walked straight toward me, his steps measured and deliberate. People stepped aside as he passed, not daring to interrupt. My cousin Ryan stared at him with wide eyes, clearly trying to figure out what someone like General Beckett was doing. At our event, the general stopped in front of me. He didn't shake my hand. He didn't say hello. He saluted. "Specialist Reyes," he said, loud enough for the room to hear. "It's good to see you again." The room fell into a silence so complete I could hear the hum of the overhead lights. I hesitated for a moment, then returned the salute with a steady hand. "It's good to see you too, sir," I replied. He turned to face the rest of the room. His voice was firm, but not angry. Just factual. Like everything he said carried its own weight. "For those of you who don't know," he said, "this woman saved my unit's lives during an operation in Ghazni. We were pinned down, taking fire from 2 directions. She refused to evacuate. She pulled 4 wounded men to safety, including me, and kept us alive until backup arrived. She was 19 years old." He let the words sit there. No one laughed now. No one whispered. My aunt didn't even blink. Ryan looked like he was trying to disappear into his seat. General Beckett continued, "I would trust this woman with my life, because I already have. And I came here today to make sure no one forgets who she is." I looked around the room. Every eye was on me. But this time, the weight wasn't shame. It was something else. Something closer to respect. Or maybe realization. Either way, I didn't feel small anymore. The general reached into his pocket and pulled out a small ribbon-wrapped box. He handed it to me with both hands. "You return this after your discharge. Said someone else would need it more. But it belongs to you." I opened the box slowly. Inside was the medal I had once given back, the Army Commendation Medal with a V for Valor. I hadn't seen it in years. "I didn't think I'd need it," I said quietly. He nodded. "You didn't. But they do." He didn't stay long. After that, just a quiet handshake, a soft thank you, and he was gone. He had come only for me. Not the event. Not the food. Not the photos. Just to speak the truth in a room full of people who didn't know it. As he walked out, the room stayed silent. I walked back to my seat, no longer an outsider. No one offered fake smiles this time. They just watched. And in their silence, I finally felt seen. The medal felt heavier in my hands than I remembered. Maybe it wasn't the medal itself, but the years it represented, years I had spent trying to forget parts of myself, parts that were too painful to explain and too easy for others to judge. I sat down slowly, my fingers still wrapped around the box. No one spoke. The air had shifted in the room. The noise, the whispers, the laughter, all of it had vanished. I didn't look around for validation. I didn't need to. I could feel it. The same people who had turned their backs on me minutes ago were now sitting in stunned silence. And it wasn't because of the medal. It was because their version of me had just been shattered. The woman they saw as just a cleaner, the one they didn't invite into conversations or offer a seat at the table, was suddenly someone they didn't recognize. But I hadn't changed. I was the same person who walked into the room 20 minutes earlier. The only difference now was that someone they respected had spoken the truth out loud. My cousin Ryan finally broke the silence. "You were in combat?" he asked, his voice low, unsure. I looked up at him. "Yes. For almost 3 years. I thought. Aunt Meredith said." He stopped himself, realizing too late that he was about to blame her for the story he'd been so quick to believe. Aunt Meredith, seated at the center of the main table, was pale. Her usual confident posture had disappeared. She stared straight ahead, lips pressed tightly together, not saying a word. For once, she didn't have a comment. No quick remark. No explanation. Just silence. Someone else across the room, a distant cousin I hadn't spoken to in years, murmured, "Why didn't you ever say anything?" I took a breath, steady and slow. Because no one ever asked. And that was the truth. I hadn't hidden my service. I hadn't made it a secret. But when I came home and took a job cleaning on base, not one person in my family asked why. They saw a uniform without rank, a job without glory, and assumed I had failed. They had decided who I was long before I had a chance to speak. What stung wasn't the silence, it was the way they had laughed behind my back and sometimes to my face. As if my worth came from how I dressed or how much I earned, not what I had given up or survived. The medal in my lap wasn't about pride. It wasn't about proving anything to them. It was about reclaiming the part of me they tried to erase. The part one had almost let them erase. I stood up, still holding the box, and looked around the room. Not out of anger. Not for attention. Just because I had something to say, and this time, I wasn't going to stay quiet. When I came back from deployment, I didn't come back to applause. I didn't come home a hero. I came home with a limp and nightmares and silence. And instead of asking how I was, most of you just looked away. I was hurting, but I kept going. I found work, I stayed on base, and I made peace with the life I chose. But what hurt more than the injury or the war was realizing I could walk into a room full of people who shared my blood, and still be treated like a stranger. I saw faces shift. Some looked away. Some looked ashamed. And some just didn't know what to say. I came here today to honor Grandpa. He was a man who served with dignity and treated everyone with respect. I didn't come to be the center of attention. But when you mock someone for what they wear, or what they do, or how little they say, you better be sure you know what you're laughing at. No one clapped. No one cheered. That wasn't the kind of moment this was. It was heavier than that. It was the kind of moment that settles into people's bones and forces them to sit with their own discomfort. I walked back to my seat, not because I was finished, but because I didn't need to say anything more. The silence I had lived with for so long was now theirs to carry. As I sat down, I felt something shift inside me, not anger, not even pride, but something closer to peace. I had told the truth. Not just with words, but with presence. And they couldn't unsee it. Ryan looked down at his plate, quiet for the first time all afternoon. My aunt still hadn't moved. And all around me, the room was still and heavy, like everyone was finally listening. They had laughed at the cleaner, but now they knew who I really was. After everything settled, the memorial brunch continued, but nothing about the room felt the same. Conversations were quieter. Laughter faded into small talk. No one made another joke about cleaning jobs or uniforms. I stayed for another 30 minutes, mostly because I didn't want to make a dramatic exit. I hadn't come for a scene, and I didn't want to leave one behind. People avoided my table for the most part. A few distant relatives offered stiff nods or awkward half-smiles, but no one said much. I didn't blame them. They were processing their own guilt, their own realizations. I could see it in their eyes. The way they kept glancing at me when they thought I wasn't looking. They weren't used to being wrong, especially not about someone they'd already labeled. Eventually, I stood up and walked toward the photo of my grandfather set at the front of the room. It was framed neatly, with a folded flag beside it. I looked at him for a long time. He had always called me brave. Always told me I reminded him of the soldiers he served beside. Even when my aunt tried to minimize my service, he never let her speak for him. You don't need rank to have courage, he'd once told me, and I carried those words like armor. I whispered a quiet thank you and turned to leave. As I reached the exit, someone called my name softly. I turned and saw Ryan walking toward me, slower than usual, his confidence replaced by something unsure. He stopped a few feet away, rubbed the back of his neck, and looked at the floor. I didn't know, he said, not quite able to meet my eyes. I figured, I replied calmly. He nodded. Still, I shouldn't have said what I said. It wasn't right. I didn't say anything. I just waited. I guess I thought, if someone wasn't showing off their success, maybe they didn't have any. That stung more than he realized, but I appreciated the honesty. I could have taken the chance to embarrass him, to throw his words back at him the way he had mocked me, but I didn't. Because I knew what it felt like to be small in front of others. I wasn't going to become what I had spent years fighting. I'm not angry, Ryan, I said. Just tired. He nodded again, eyes still low. I get it. We stood in silence for a few seconds before I turned and walked out into the sunlight. The cool air hit my face like a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. I felt lighter, not because anything outside had changed, but because something inside me had. That moment, that day, didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the years of being overlooked, underestimated, or quietly pushed aside. But it reminded me of something I had almost forgotten, that my story mattered. That what I had done mattered. Even if no one had clapped when I returned home. Even if I never wore the uniform again. I went back to work the next day. Same base, same building, same mop and bucket. But everything felt different. Not because they treated me any better, most of them didn't even know what had happened. But because I had stopped seeing myself the way others did. I didn't need to shrink to make people comfortable. I didn't need to hide what I'd survived. Later that week, a young recruit passed me in the hallway. He was maybe 19, fresh out of training, uniform too crisp, boots too clean. He gave me a polite nod and then stopped. "You're Reyes, right?" he asked. I looked up. "Yes. I heard about Ghazni," he said. "They told us in briefing. That was you?" I paused for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah. That was me." He stood straighter. "Thank you for your service, ma'am." There was no crowd. No applause. Just a hallway, a mop bucket, and a young soldier who saw me for who I really was. That moment meant more than the medal. For the first time in years, I felt whole. So no, I don't wear my past like a badge. I don't need to talk about what I did or where I went. But if someone ever asks, I'll tell them the truth. I'm not just a cleaner. I'm a veteran, a medic, a survivor, and a woman who stood when it mattered most, even when no one was watching, and that's enough.